up, President Obama is just north of Manhattan in Westchester County, New York. He'll be pushing a $300 billion spending plan for roads and bridges, and we'll give you a taste of that event when it happens. It's an issue the White House believes Democrats may be able to run on this November. But as for Republicans, another primary night brought more confusion about the party's identity. Tea Party candidate Ben Sasse crushed his GOP opponents for the open Nebraska Senate seat. At first glance, this would appear to be a relief for the fringe after last week's establishment victories in North Carolina and Georgia. But that means accepting the premise of the term establishment. See, these establishment Republicans who have prevailed this primary season were often Tea Party candidates just a few years ago. Their views haven't changed. The only thing that's really changed is that the mainstream has started funding their campaigns. That's a fact that hasn't been lost on their opponents come the general election. Democratic strategist Erikka Knuti is back with us to talk about that. Erikka, you've highlighted a couple of examples like James Lankford running for the Senate in Oklahoma and Jack Kingston in Georgia. Why did they go from Tea Party in 2010 to establishment now?
Well, I think the main thing about the Tea Party that they've done overall is they've done a really good job of talking about being anti-government, but not done a good job of outlining what a Tea Party government would look like. Because of that, all of the candidates that actually end up becoming elected officials or that are already in Congress, anything they do that's governing makes them suspect and makes them kind of part of the establishment.
Yeah. Let's take a step back for a moment and talk about the Republican Party as it exists today. CNBC's Brian Sullivan was on Morning Joe yesterday, and he gave a very passionate rant about having grown up in a conservative household, and yet he just cannot recognize the party today. Take a listen.
Can we just stop saying the Republican Party? As somebody that grew up in a conservative household, I don't recognize the Republican Party of even my youth. I don't like what I see. I don't like the far right. I don't like the extremism. Right? They've pushed me away. As somebody who is pretty much not religious, right? Pro same-sex marriage, pro legalization of marijuana for the most part, okay? What party is this? What party am I supposed to be in? When I'm a fiscal conservative who believes that small government can often be better, there are times for larger government. So we keep saying the Republican Party, and I love you guys, and I love this show, and I come on all the time. But I don't know who the Republican Party is anymore. I don't know if the Republican Party knows who the Republican, because it's not a party, unfortunately, Republicans, that I can get on board with, because I don't like the small-minded attitude, a lot of the far right-wing stuff that comes out. I should go home now. Come on.
Yay.
So no surprise here, Eric. I mean, that clip got a lot of play, and I think, you know, obviously he is very physically angry, and I think he speaks the same language, the way that many Republicans feel today about the party. I'm often asked, why are you a Republican today? And I usually respond with, you know, I think I'm a version of the Republican Party, and I think I represent sort of this next chapter, this next group of people coming up in the Republican Party that have evolved on many of the social issues, whether it's immigration reform or equality or legalizing marijuana. Sense that ultimately the way the party is now, that's not sustainable. Ultimately, in order to win a national election, they are going to have to evolve, right? Maybe it's going to take a few years until this next generation ultimately takes control. I don't know.
Well, I think it is going to take a while, and you have a big uphill battle. I mean, you look at the example of Renee Elmers, who won the primary, and she was hailed as a, establishment candidate that won in North Carolina. Why was she considered establishment? Because she supported some sort of immigration reform. She didn't say amnesty or, pathway to citizenship, just some sort of reform. So the Chamber of Commerce backed her. But if you really kind of peel back the layers, I mean, this is a woman that in her 2010, election to Congress, which she first ran, that said that we shouldn't be covering people with pre-existing conditions, or that maternity care was too costly to be covered. And that's a pretty extreme position. Yeah. She also took the Tea Party Express bus tour around the country, was a Sarah Palin acolyte. And since then, I don't know if you guys remember this, but she ran ads about the Park 51 Islamic Center in Manhattan that was supposed to be near Ground Zero, calling it a victory mosque. And we went on TV with Anderson Cooper and had a big exchange where she asked him if he was anti-Christian. I mean, so this is the woman that's now being considered establishment. And you look, I'll take Jack Kingston in Georgia. I mean, this is a guy that is also a creationist. He certainly isn't liberal, but at this point, the big pool of GOP primary opponents, I mean, he's not Phil Gingrey, who defended Todd Aiken's legitimate rape comment. He's not Paul Brown, that said that evolution is, a scourge from the pits of hell. And he's not Karen Handel, that, recommended defunding Planned Parenthood and causing a huge rift and crisis within the Susan G. Komen Foundation. So that makes him establishment, that he's just not that right wing, but he's still incredibly right wing. I mean, the Tea Party's backed him, and they signed a letter in 2010 as their person that they wanted to chair the Appropriations Committee. Yeah. So I think, Abby, when you look at what you kind of have overcome in this battle that's going on, and it's moving establishment people further and further right. And so there's going to have to be an insurgence of youth that comes in. And I think, some people are really kind of honing in on it. I think Rand Paul is kind of seeing a lot of this. You see some of his statements alluding to this. But something's got to move forward. I think that younger Republicans do have to get involved and push their party back.
And Tori, that may win local races, but that doesn't win a national election.
No, it doesn't. And you talk about Rand Paul, and he's sort of living out some of that back and forth that you guys are talking about. We thought that he had come to his senses talking about the issue of voter suppression, and then he walked it back. A surrogate said at no point did Senator Paul come out against voter ID laws. Oh, all right. Well, thank you, Senator. And here we see not only the power and import of this issue on the right, but also the sort of dance that we see quite often on the right, where folks come out, Paul Ryan has done this, several others, Marco Rubio, where folks come out and say something sane sort of in public and then walk it back in what to the left feels like in private in sort of other sources, other places. What do you think about that dance that we see these folks do a lot of that time?
Well, it's an entire lack of leadership. I mean, it used to be that people stood up and said what they thought and then had to explain it to their constituents. You had a back and forth, and you agree to disagree sometimes. But these guys are so, I guess on like pins and needles, because they get hit so far from the, so much from the right and from the left, that they don't really know where to stand, and they aren't experienced, I think, enough as legislators to have confidence in themselves. And they certainly now looking for higher office. You look at Marco Rubio. I mean, this is a guy who represents Florida, right? So Miami is one of the cities that has the most to lose in a climate change situation, and he's not really sure where he stands. I mean, he should know exactly where he stands, representing the people of Florida, and he should be able to explain that to the people of Florida and not be worrying about kind of the election ahead of him or the next race.
Right. Yeah, I mean, first he essentially came out as a climate science denier, then he sort of backed it up but said basically we can't do anything about it, though. Unbelievable that has become what's considered a mainstream view in the Republican Party, and as Abby's dad could attest to, you're not going to get too far. You're not going to get too far. I thought there was a presidential candidate that wasn't a climate denier. I guess, I remember someone, maybe Huntsman, I don't know. Right. I think I've heard of that guy before. But, I think part of the problem here is that Republicans still look to 2010, right, and the Tea Party wave as this, great victory for them. And, yes, they had this setback in 2012, but they're on track to do okay in 2014. And what we've seen is with two different electorates, right, an electorate that shows up for the midterms and then a different one for the national elections, Republicans are sort of able to comfort themselves by still doing okay in a midterm election.
Well, and redistricting is a big part of that. I mean, Renee Elmers, who I mentioned as our, woman who doesn't believe in maternity care, should be covered. But she won in a nail biter. I mean, there was a recount. It was only a couple hundred votes, and then they redistricted her. So now she's pretty much safe. Clay Aiken is the guy who's running against her right now. But I mean, she doesn't have the same kind of a competitive district, so she can get away with a lot of that stuff. And so I think a lot of their confidence, particularly with the House members, is that they're set for the next, rest of the decade, for the next 10 years. In the Senate, when you've got to go outside of your safe district and talk to other counties, it gets a little tougher. And it certainly gets almost impossible with the policies they have right now when you look nationally.
Yeah. Erikka Knuti, thank you. Up next, you